You are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of March 6, 2025. A lot has happened today, so let's get started. Before we begin, I would like to sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. Now let's move to the front lines and return to Ukraine. There is, of course, a lot of news here. And, of course, the most important one, which has already been confirmed by absolutely all sources, is that the United States of America has stopped sharing intelligence information with Ukraine. Actually, what is intelligence information? This is a big question, and perhaps when you just hear the term intelligence information, it's not clear what it refers to. Some say it's about HIMARS, 8ACMS, Storm Shadow, coordinates, or some photographs. But of course, without specific examples, it's impossible to understand what intelligence information is. And perhaps we will only be able to feel the consequences of this cutoff of Ukraine from US intelligence over time. Sources report that the US had been providing up to 80% of all the information, images, and data that Ukraine received since the beginning of the special military operation. The French, of course, have promised that despite the US refusal to supply Kyiv with intelligence, France will continue its efforts and try to replace the United States in this field. Interestingly, I would also like to note that today, the page dedicated to security guarantees and the agreement between the US and Ukraine, which was signed back in June 2024 between Biden and Zelensky, stating that the US would support Ukraine with all its might, has disappeared from the official website of the US presidential administration. Today, this page is gone, and it seems that this decree will soon be revoked by Donald Trump himself. So we can see that this saga of security guarantees from Western countries to Ukraine is also coming to some logical conclusion. Today, a very interesting situation occurred. Various pro-Russian sources, for example, reported that during the fighting, the Russian army managed to cross the Oskol River between the settlements of Krugliakovka and Sinkovo. And in fact, today, according to some pro-Russian sources, the Russian army has begun forming a bridgehead in another area of the Oskol River, slightly south of the settlement of Kupiansk. Let me remind you that during December-January, similar operations were conducted west of the settlement of Dvurekhnaya, in the area of the same Liman-Pervyi, Sinkovka. There, the Russian army managed to create a fairly wide bridgehead. Now the Ukrainian side is counterattacking. So today, information came in that another crossing has occurred, but this time further south of Kupiansk. Based on these two pieces of news, there is a very high probability that the Russian army may soon attempt to encircle Kupiansk from both the north and the south. So how does this relate to the discussion about intelligence information? In my understanding, if the Ukrainian side has stopped receiving information regarding the concentration of Russian armed forces units, as well as information about the movement of personnel from one point to another, then in my opinion, this is one of the most significant blows dealt by the Trump administration to Ukraine. Let me remind you that the entire Svatove episode likely happened because Ukrainian forces managed to covertly move a significant number of troops and launch a lightning attack in a direction where it was not expected. Now, it seems that the Russian side has similar opportunities to quietly move a large number of units from one section of the front to another, where Ukraine will not expect an attack, and conduct a lightning strike that could lead to the collapse of the entire front and, in general, the collapse of all of Ukraine, not just a specific direction like Svatove, Kupiansk, Chasiv Yar, and so on. And the situation that occurred in Sinkovo may already be a consequence of all these stories with intelligence information. Well, we will keep a close eye on this. As for the evening of March 6th, so far, the information about the crossing of the Oskol in the second location has only been confirmed by pro-Russian sources. We are waiting for additional information from neutral sources, perhaps some geolocations. And if this information is confirmed, then we can definitely say that the battle for Kupiansk has taken on a completely new character. And in the near future, the fighting will only intensify. If we continue with Kupiansk and move to the northeastern direction, to the northern direction near the settlement of Dvurekhnaya, then today, according to neutral cartographers, the Ukrainian armed forces continued counterattacks and managed to regain control over several forest areas between Zapsilia and Dvurekhnaya. However, I would like to remind you that despite the fact that neutral pro-Ukrainian cartographers color this area in favor of the Ukrainian armed forces, I would like to remind you that initially all these territories were considered disputed. That is, in my opinion, somewhere in December, some cartographers, possibly including neutral pro-Ukrainian ones, colored these territories, say, in the color of Russian Federation control without obtaining geolocation. Today, the reverse coloring has occurred. Therefore, we do not exclude that perhaps the initial colorings were erroneous. Well, we will observe how the situation develops further. Next, we move with you to the northern Kupiansk direction, from where a fairly large number of various news is also coming. Today, a lot of news is also coming from the Svatove direction. And since this morning, many publications have been published, mainly from pro-Ukrainian sources, which may already be not just sounding the alarm, but possibly even asking the Ukrainian command to withdraw Ukrainian units from this cauldron. Over the past 24 hours, a huge number of geolocations have been published from this direction, mainly showing FPV drone strikes on Ukrainian armed forces equipment. Pay attention to this video. It shows one of the last two remaining roads of life that Ukraine might still control for supplying and maintaining its forces in the Svatove salient. However, even if we look at these frames, we can see that literally every 10 to 20 meters, there is burning or destroyed Ukrainian equipment, which indicates that the Russian Federation has established 100% and complete fire control over the main supply routes running from the Sumy region towards Svatove. Combat operations are also continuing in the settlement of Maloloknya. By the way, today, as a reminder, the European summit scheduled for March 6th is taking place, and Zelensky has flown there. It is possible that the heightened activity of the Russian armed forces along almost the entire line of contact is also connected to this summit. But again, if we summarize and look at the Svatove direction from a different angle, there is an extremely high probability that the situation here will begin to change with very, very high dynamics in the near future. For now, there is still a bridgehead that the Ukrainian armed forces are trying to hold on to, despite all the losses that the Ukrainian side has to endure daily. And we can see that the main goal of the Russian Federation is not so much the personnel of the Ukrainian armed forces, but rather to destroy as much equipment as possible. Next, we move with you to the southern Kupiansk direction, from where news is also coming. Here, the clearing of settlements such as Zarikny and Torsk is gradually continuing. The Russian armed forces have established complete fire control. Now, there is a kind of small siege underway, the main goal of which is to exhaust the Ukrainian units in these two villages by cutting off their supplies. And at some point, which is likely to come very soon, the Russian army will probably begin an offensive. Next, we move with you to the Konstantinovka direction, where, in a somewhat frantic manner, the Ukrainian armed forces, despite the weather and conditions, are trying to build a defensive line opposite the settlement of Konstantinovka. In these frames, we can observe a Ukrainian tractor attempting to dig another trench directly opposite the area of a potential advance by the Russian armed forces. We can see that the Ukrainian armed forces are trying to build a defensive line already 2.5 kilometers from Konstantinovka and approximately 4 to 6 kilometers from the forward positions of the Russian armed forces. It's no wonder that all equipment that goes out into the fields is immediately destroyed. Here, there is virtually no defensive line, or if there is, it is not as solid as the Ukrainian command might have hoped. Gradually, the settlement of Chasiv Yar is turning into another Volchansk, and all Ukrainian defensive lines are being leveled to the ground. But given that the Ukrainian armed forces are now trying to build fortified areas around Konstantinovka, there is an extremely high probability that the main goal of these battles, both for Chasiv Yar and Toretsk, is to slow down the Russian army, buy some time, which the Ukrainian side might try to use wisely by building defensive lines. However, it seems that time has already run out, and it is unlikely that anything meaningful will be built. Information also continues to come in from the settlement of Toretsk. Despite the fact that the initiative on this front is generally in the hands of the Russian Federation, the Ukrainian armed forces continue their attempts to counterattack in Toretsk. Over the past 24 hours, according to various neutral cartographers, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to regain control over the northern mine. This is the mine for which the Russian side had been fighting, possibly for a month or slightly less. And in one counterattack, control was regained. For now, there are no geolocations confirming this information, but it is already circulating online. So it is possible that footage of objective control will appear soon. Also, according to the same neutral cartographers, there is information that the Russian army, in order to avoid encirclement, has begun gradually withdrawing its units from the northern and northwestern parts of Toretsk, with the aim of consolidating its forces in the area of the central mine, that is, in the heart of Toretsk, where the Russian side may try to stabilize the situation, repel all Ukrainian attacks, and then counterattack again with the goal of completely clearing the settlement. Next, we move with you towards Vozdvizhenka, towards the H-32 highway. Here, the situation is similar. The Ukrainian armed forces conducted a series of counter-offensive operations, both towards the settlements of Baranovka, Vodyanoye II, and towards the settlement of Zelenoye Pole. Speaking of Zelenoye Pole, just 4 days ago, Ukrainian sources published objective control footage showing strikes on Russian army positions from a short distance. This footage was taken precisely at this location. It was here that a Ukrainian tank was firing at the forward positions of the Russian armed forces. There is an extremely high probability that the settlement of Zelenoye Pole may already be under full control of the Ukrainian armed forces. That is, we can see that the Ukrainian side is striking at Toretsk and Vozdvizhenka, with the aim of pushing back Russian units from potential attacks along the western and eastern pincers towards the Klebanbek Reservoir. Next, we move with you to the settlement of Pokrovsk, where the main fighting is taking place at the base of the small salient of Kotlina, Udachna, Uspenivka, Shevchenko. Today, the Russian armed forces continued clearing the bridgehead that the Ukrainian armed forces may have established in the southeastern part of the settlement. Let me remind you that just yesterday, the map was updated in favor of the Ukrainian army after a successful counterattack, as a result of which Ukrainian soldiers managed to seize the southeastern part of the Shevchenko settlement. Equipment was abandoned, infantry dispersed into plantations and buildings, after which the Russian army began a full-scale clearing operation. First, the equipment was destroyed, and now possibly assault operations are underway. A similar situation is unfolding in the southwestern part of the same Meshok. Bloody and fierce fighting is taking place for the settlement of Uspenivka, which may change hands several times in just one day. As of the end of March 6th, information is coming in that the eastern and central parts of the settlement are either in a grey zone or in disputed territory. It is impossible to say for sure who controls this area. Next, we move with you to the Bohatyr direction. Today, the Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed full and confident control over the settlement of Andriivka. Already today, various reports and messages have begun to emerge that, due to the fall and final clearing of this stronghold, there is an extremely high probability that the Ukrainian armed forces will abandon the settlement of Constantinople overnight and retreat towards the settlements of Bohatyr and Rozliv. That is, it seems that the fighting for this pocket is coming to some logical conclusion. Some neutral cartographers have gradually begun to update the map between Ulakli and Constantinople in favor of the Russian armed forces. Fighting also continues in the southern Donetsk direction, where the Russian army is advancing. Today, some sources report that the forward groups of the Russian army have already entered the territory of the settlement of Volna Pole. Let me remind you that just yesterday, the Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed the clearing of Privilya. Today, information is coming in about further advances in the northwestern direction. We can see that the Russian army does not plan to stop here. The pace of the offensive is only gaining momentum. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, more and more objective control footage is coming from the settlement of Huliai Pole. More and more FAB bombs are hitting this settlement. According to some sources, over the past few days, at least several temporary deployment points of Ukrainian armed forces headquarters have been destroyed. Next, we move with you to the western Zaporizhzhia and Kherson directions. Last night, an Iskander missile struck a hotel in the settlement of Kryvyi Rih. A little later, Zelensky himself confirmed that the strike targeted the hotel at a time when foreign volunteers from France, the United Kingdom and Ukraine were present in the hotel. However, according to Zelensky, the group managed to evacuate in time. Despite the successful evacuation, according to Zelensky, there are still casualties. The Russian Federation also continues to carry out massive strikes on Odessa and the port infrastructure of Odessa and the Odessa region. Today, strikes were carried out on the settlement of Yuzhne, with a large number of explosions and destroyed warehouses. It appears that Russia has reliable information regarding the storage locations of possibly BECs, unmanned aerial vehicles, or other equipment. All these positions are currently being targeted by Russian missile forces and aviation. And that's all for now, dear friends.